During a meeting about my late husband's estate, my daughter asked me to step out of the room. This is a family matter, Mom. We'll fill you in later, she said, standing in the doorway of what used to be Jack's study. He had no clue I had the most recent version of the will. The way she blocked me from entering that room, our room, was like a slap in the face. My own daughter, looking at me like I didn't belong in the house Jack and I had shared for over 4 decades. I barely managed to whisper, "But I am family. Jack was my husband, Emily." She gave that same dismissive sigh I'd heard from her more and more lately. "We just need to handle the estate without extra emotion. David has the financial background. We need to be practical." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of David, my son-in-law, tidying up paperwork on Jack's old mahogany desk. Those papers, they weren't just documents. They were about my life, my future, my home. My chest tightened. "Please, Mom," Emily said with a fake softness. "It won't take long." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak as she gently closed the door on me. I stood there in the hallway, surrounded by pictures of Jack and me across the years, and I had never felt so invisible. It had only been 3 weeks since we buried him. 3 weeks since I stood there watching them lower him into the ground. The wound was still fresh. The empty spot beside me in bed still startled me each night. And now this, like being erased. I walked slowly into the kitchen. My kitchen. The space where I'd spent so many years, where Jack and I had laid the tile floor ourselves during our 10th year of marriage. The little window garden still thrived, herbs growing strong, not knowing Jack wouldn't be around to praise my rosemary chicken ever again. My hands shook as I filled the kettle. From the study I could still hear their voices, muffled but clear enough to catch the tone. Emily's would rise now and then, calm but firm. When had my quiet little girl turned into this cold, calculating woman? As the kettle started to boil, I found myself remembering. Just 6 months earlier, Jack sat in this same kitchen. He was already thinner, his face hollowing from the illness, but his eyes were still full of that sharp kindness I loved. "Debbie," he said, reaching for my hand across the table, "I've updated my will." "Jack, don't," I had protested. "I can't talk about that." "You have to," he said softly. "Emily's changed. You've seen it too." I wanted to believe she was just worried, just stressed. I tried to tell him that. But Jack had just shaken his head. "It's more than that. Promise me you'll be ready. Promise you'll be strong when it matters." I promised him, not fully understanding what he meant back then. But now, standing alone in the kitchen, listening to my daughter and her husband decide my fate like I wasn't even here, the weight of Jack's warning finally sank in. The kettle screamed, yanking me back into the moment. I poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the dark color slowly seep out, and thought about the little safe deposit box key Jack had pressed into my palm 2 weeks before he passed. "Not until I'm gone," he had whispered. "When you see who they really are." I hadn't opened it yet. It just felt so final, like if I did, I'd be admitting he was really gone. But I knew now. Tomorrow I'd go. Tomorrow I'd open that box and find out what Jack had truly left for me. My tea sat untouched, growing cold as I waited. Eventually the door to the study opened and Emily came out, David right behind her. Her face looked triumphant. With smug satisfaction. "All done, Mom," she chirped. "We've got everything figured out." "Everything?" I echoed. David nodded, cool and professional. "The house, the finances, and a care plan moving forward. You won't have to worry about anything." I looked directly at Emily. "Jack and I always made these decisions together. Shouldn't I be included in this conversation?" Her smile went tight. "Dad left us in charge of managing things, Mom. It's all clearly laid out." She placed a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to comfort, but it felt more like ownership. "You're still grieving. We didn't want to trouble you with the details." I glanced down at her hand, then back at the face of the daughter I once nursed through fevers and broken hearts. Now she was patting me like a fragile old woman who couldn't be trusted with adult matters. "I see," I said quietly, though in truth I was beginning to see a whole lot more than she thought. "We've got it all covered," she said again, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Trust me, Mom. It's what Dad would have wanted." But as I watched them walk away, carrying folders of documents I hadn't even seen, I saw Jack's face in my mind, how serious he'd been in those final weeks. How sure. How clear. "Be ready," he had told me. And finally I was. The next morning I went to the bank. The manager led me into a quiet room so I could view the contents of Jack's safe deposit box in private. My hands shook as I turned the key, not sure what final truths Jack had left behind. Inside the box was a thick manila envelope, and across the front was my name, written in his familiar handwriting. I picked it up gently as if the paper might still carry his warmth. The first thing I pulled out was a notarized copy of his updated will, dated 6 months earlier. As I read the legal wording, my breath caught in my throat. Jack had left everything to me, the house, the investments, all of it. There was a portion set aside for Emily, but it wasn't anything like what she'd led me to believe. She had told me I'd be getting just a modest monthly allowance. I whispered to the empty room, too stunned to do anything else. Behind the will was a letter, and a small USB drive marked, "Watch this first." But what stopped me cold was the third item. A folder packed with bank statements, loan paperwork, and power of attorney forms, all bearing my signature. I had never signed any of them. My hands trembled as I stared at those forged documents, my thoughts racing. Had Emily been plotting this for years? My own daughter? I needed to get back to the house. I needed to know what was on that USB. When I returned home, the place was blissfully quiet. Emily had mentioned earlier that she was meeting with a real estate agent, words that now took on a much darker tone. I hurried to Jack's computer and plugged in the USB drive. One file appeared. A video. Jack's face filled the screen, thinner than I remembered but unmistakably him. His jaw was set the way it always was when he was determined. "Debbie, my love," he began, and the sound of his voice brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "If you're watching this, it means you've found the will, and the rest. I'm sorry to leave this burden on your shoulders, but you deserve to know the truth." He went on to explain how, almost a year earlier, he'd discovered what Emily and David were up to. How they'd been carefully positioning themselves to take over everything the moment he was gone. How they had talked about putting me in assisted living. Not because I needed care, but because it would give them full control of the house and the money. "I confronted her," Jack said, and there was pain in his eyes. "She denied it. Claimed she was just helping organize our finances. But then I found those loan applications, with your name forged right on them." He took a slow breath. "They've borrowed nearly $200,000, Debbie. In your name." I gasped, remembering the new luxury car, the upgrades to the beach house. All those expenses that had seemed a little too extravagant, even with David's job. "I changed my will that very week," Jack continued. "Everything now goes to you with legal safeguards to keep them from touching a thing. Walter Griffin has the paperwork. He's expecting your call." The video went on, Jack detailing everything he'd uncovered and the steps he'd taken to shield me. When it ended, I just sat there staring at his still image frozen on the screen, the last message I'd ever received from him. Then I heard the front door open. I jumped, quickly pulled out the USB drive and tucked it deep into my pocket. "Mom? You home?" Emily called. I took a breath, steadied myself, and answered. "In the study, sweetheart." She stepped into the room, her smile faltering when she saw me at Jack's desk. "What are you doing in here?" "Just remembering," I said, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. Jack spent so much time in this room. Her face softened in that way she always used when she wanted to seem compassionate. "I know you miss him. But there are some practical things we should start thinking about." She sat on the edge of the desk. "Actually, I'm glad I caught you. David and I were talking, and we think it might be time to consider selling the house." "Selling?" I repeated, though after seeing Jack's video it didn't shock me. It's a big place for one person, Mom. All the upkeep, the stairs. We're worried about you living here alone." "And where exactly would I go?" I asked, watching her closely. Her answer came too fast. Too rehearsed. "There's a lovely retirement place not far from us. We've already checked it out. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people your age." She laid her hand over mine, a gesture that once would have felt warm. Now it felt like strategy. "It would be so much nicer than rattling around this old place by yourself." I studied her face, looking for any trace of the little girl who used to curl up in my lap, who'd draw me crayon hearts and bring me flowers she'd picked from the yard. When had that girl turned into someone who saw me as an obstacle? "I'm not ready to leave my home," I said quietly. Her smile tightened. "Mom, we're not asking you to decide right now. But the market's great at the moment, and Dad would have wanted us to be practical." She stood, smoothing her designer dress. David's meeting with our financial advisor tomorrow. We should go over your monthly expenses, just to make sure the transition goes smoothly. Transition? I asked. She gave a little laugh like I was being silly. From Dad managing things to us, she said gently as if I were 5. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're taken care of. After she left, I stayed in Jack's chair, running my fingers along the worn leather arms. The evidence I now carried in my purse felt heavier than anything I'd held in my life. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, had been quietly preparing to strip everything away from me. She had used my grief, my vulnerability as a tool. Not to support me but to remove me from the picture. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Jack had written down for Walter Griffin, the attorney. As it rang, I looked over at the family photo still on the desk. Jack, me and Emily at her college graduation. We looked so normal. So happy. Griffin Law Office, a voice answered. This is Debbie Harper, I said, and with each word I felt a new strength settling in. My husband Jack told me to call. I found his will and I need your help. The days that followed my meeting with Walter Griffin felt unreal, like I was moving through my own house as a stranger. Quiet, cautious. Watching every word, every phone call. Making sure Emily and David never suspected I knew. Every whispered conversation I'd overheard in recent weeks now echoed in my ears with new, chilling clarity. Walter had confirmed everything. Jack came to me about 8 months ago, he told me during our meeting. He was deeply worried. Said he'd uncovered troubling financial activity and wanted to make sure you were protected. Today was the day Emily had chosen for what she called a family meeting, though I knew full well what it was really about. From the kitchen window, I watched as her sleek sedan pulled into my driveway, followed closely by David's big SUV. But they didn't come alone this time. Their friend Brian was with them, the investment advisor who always looked at me like I was some slow old woman whenever I dared ask about our finances. Mom. Emily called as she let herself in with the key she'd secretly had copied months ago. We're here. I smoothed my cardigan and instinctively touched the USB drive still tucked in my pocket. In the kitchen, sweetheart, I called out, steadying my voice. They walked in like they owned the place, Emily leading with fake cheer, David checking his expensive watch, and Brian holding a sleek leather portfolio. Suddenly my kitchen felt smaller, like their presence had swallowed the space whole. Let's move to the dining room, Emily suggested brightly. We've got a lot to go over. I followed, quietly noting how comfortable they were taking charge in the home I'd built with Jack. Before I even sat down, Emily had already spread a pile of documents across the table. Mom, she started, her tone shifting into that syrupy condescension I'd come to recognize. We've sorted everything out. She slid a paper toward me while David added, after reviewing Dad's estate, we've determined a monthly allowance that'll cover all your basic needs. I looked down at the number, $1,800 a month. Then looked back at them. $1,800, I repeated. From Jack's pension and investments that bring in more than $12,000 each month? Emily's smile faltered just slightly. Their expenses, Mom. House maintenance until we sell it, investment management fees. And when were you planning to mention the loans you took out in my name? I asked, calm but direct. Silence. Emily's face turned ghost pale, then flushed with sudden color. David froze mid-motion, his hand reaching for another paper. I don't know what you're talking about, Emily said, her voice stripped of any charm now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the copies. 2 home equity loans, a personal loan, credit cards I never applied for. All bearing my name. All forged. David was the first to recover. Debbie, you're confused. You must have signed those when Jack was sick. You probably just don't remember. It was a stressful time. No, I said firmly, louder than I'd spoken in months. I never signed these and you both know that. Emily leaned forward, dropping the act entirely. Dad asked us to help. He knew you couldn't handle the finances anymore. Jack knew exactly what you were doing, I cut in. He found the forged paperwork months ago. The look on their faces. It should have felt satisfying to catch them in the lie, but all I felt was heartbreak. My own daughter, caught red-handed, didn't even look sorry. She looked angry at being found out. That's ridiculous, she snapped. Dad trusted us to. To what, Emily? I said, voice trembling with emotion. Put me in a care facility? Sell the house I've lived in for 40 years? drain my retirement for your home remodels and vacations. Brian, who had been growing more and more uncomfortable, started gathering his things. Maybe I should give you all some privacy. Stay, David said sharply. This is all a big misunderstanding. He turned to me, softening his tone like I was some fragile doll. Grief messes with memory. Sometimes people imagine things that aren't there. I have the will, I said simply. Emily's hand froze midair, her smug wave cut short. What? Jack's actual will, I replied. Not the version you've been pretending exists. I looked at Brian. Did they tell you they had power of attorney? That Jack left everything in their hands. Brian hesitated. That was my understanding. Yes. They lied. I placed a certified copy of the will Walter had given me right in front of them. Jack left everything to me. Every bank account, every investment, every inch of this house. David snatched the paper and began scanning it like he was trying to make the words disappear. Emily leaned over his shoulder, her expression tightening as she read. This can't be real, she muttered. Dad would never. He did, I said, staring straight at her. He did it after he found out what you were doing. Her expression twisted into something bitter and sharp. You turned him against me. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done to me, I corrected. You stole from me. You planned to sell my home. You wanted to lock me away. You can't take care of yourself. Emily shouted, the last of her mask crumbling. Look at you. You're old, forgetful. You need help. Her words hit like slaps. But I didn't flinch. I'm grieving, I said. Not helpless. There's a difference. David, ever the tactician, tried to calm things down. He placed a hand on Emily's arm. Let's not escalate. Clearly there's been some confusion. No, I said, rising to my feet, calm but unshakable. The only confusion here is that you both thought I'd sit quietly and let you take everything Jack and I spent a lifetime building. Emily's eyes narrowed, her voice now low and venomous. You'll regret this. You really think you can manage without us? You'll be begging for our help within a month. I looked at her, my daughter yet no longer familiar, and felt a wave of sadness so deep it nearly swallowed me. The only thing I truly regret is that Jack had to find out what kind of person our daughter had become before he died. It broke his heart. Emily snatched her purse off the chair, knocking it over as she stood up. This isn't over, she snapped. That will can be contested. Your mental capacity can still be questioned. I met her stare, steady and unblinking. Go ahead and try, I said. Walter has the medical records Jack insisted on getting before he changed the will. And he has proof, evidence of your forged signatures. David's face turned pale, all the color draining out of him. Forgery is a felony. And for the first time I saw fear in both their eyes. 3 days passed after that confrontation. The house felt emptier, but also quieter. More mine again. Emily and David had stormed out that day, their threats still hanging heavy in the air. I changed the locks the next morning and asked Walter to handle any contact with them from that point forward. You need to see something else, Walter said one afternoon when I met him again at his office. Jack, it turned out, had been even more thorough than we'd realized. Walter slid a thick folder across his desk. Photos, bank records, transcripts of conversations, all labeled and organized in Jack's handwriting. He hired a private investigator? I asked, flipping through the pages in disbelief. Walter nodded. About 7 months ago he suspected something wasn't right. Especially when Emily started asking for detailed info about your finances, pushing to be added to your accounts. Said it was just in case. One photograph showed them at a cafe meeting with a realtor. Another walking through a retirement facility I'd never seen. And the worst, one photo of them standing in my bedroom taking inventory. That day I had been out at a doctor's appointment. Who's this woman? I asked, pointing to a smiling stranger they were having lunch with. Walter's expression grew grim. Carla Matthews. A specialist in elder competency evaluations. The realization hit hard. They were preparing a case to have me declared mentally unfit. Jack believed that, Walter confirmed. That's why he insisted on a full mental and neurological evaluation before he changed the will. So they couldn't claim he wasn't of sound mind. I shut the folder slowly, my chest aching. Why didn't he just confront them? Tell them he knew. Walter leaned back in his chair, hands folded. He was protecting you. He figured if they knew he'd caught on, they'd act faster. Maybe even more recklessly. He wanted everything legally airtight before they realized what was happening. Driving home, I stopped by the cemetery. Jack's headstone was still surrounded by fresh earth. The flowers I'd left the week before were already wilting under the summer sun. I replaced them with new roses, knelt down beside him and told him everything. You knew her better than I did, I whispered. When did she change, Jack? Was it always there and I just never saw it? The breeze stirred the leaves in the trees above me, but there was no answer. There never would be. Back at the house, someone was waiting on my porch. It was Robert, Jack's closest friend for over 30 years, and the man we'd chosen to be Emily's godfather. Just seeing him brought a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks. Debbie, he said, standing up as I approached. I heard about everything. I would have come sooner, but I've been overseas. I welcomed him inside, thankful for a familiar face from a time when life still made sense. We sat in the kitchen over coffee and he told me, Jack shared some of it with me. Not everything, but enough. I wasn't surprised when Walter reached out. You knew, I said quietly, feeling a strange mix of betrayal and relief. Why didn't you tell me? Robert's weathered face creased with regret. Jack asked me not to. He said you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it yourself. He knew you'd protect Emily until the truth was undeniable. And he was right. If anyone had told me my daughter was plotting against me, I would have called them crazy. I needed to see it with my own eyes. There's more, Robert said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out an envelope. Jack gave me this before he passed. Said I'd know when it was time to give it to you. Inside was a single key, and an address I didn't recognize. What is this? I asked. A storage unit, Robert said. Jack rented it about 6 months ago. He never even told me what's in it. Just said it was for you and only you. The facility was on the edge of town. A plain, gray place lined with identical metal doors. Unit 247 was tucked away near the back, out of view from the main office. My fingers trembled as I turned the key in the lock. The door groaned open to reveal neatly stacked shelves. Dozens of boxes, each carefully labeled in Jack's handwriting. Financial records, Emily childhood, our wedding, family trips. And I saw it. A giant whiteboard mounted on the wall, covered in Jack's handwriting. A timeline stretching back 5 years. It tracked every odd request, every unusual withdrawal, every moment Emily or David tried to access our finances. Color-coded. Dated. Oh, Jack, I whispered, brushing my fingers across the ink. His handwriting felt like a message from beyond. He had seen everything coming. In the center of the unit stood a small desk. On it sat a laptop. Taped to the laptop screen was a little note in Jack's handwriting. The place we got engaged plus the year we met. I couldn't help but smile even after everything. North Point Lighthouse, 1970. That was Jack, romantic to the end even in his investigative work. When the laptop powered on, a sea of folders filled the screen. Inside were hundreds of files. Scanned documents, spreadsheets detailing odd financial activity, emails Jack had recovered between Emily and David discussing their plans for after. One folder labeled simply evidence held the most damning piece, recordings. I clicked the first one. Emily's voice came through the speakers, calm and methodical. She's so trusting. It'll be easy, she said, clearly referring to me. We just need to move slow. Make her think it's all her idea. Then David laughed. Your dad's the real obstacle. He watches those accounts like a hawk. Not for much longer, Emily replied, her tone cold and flat. The doctor gave him 3 months. Maybe 6. We just need to be patient. I stopped the recording, my hand covering my mouth. I felt sick. They had been counting down the days until Jack died. Calculating, preparing, planning their takeover like it was a business transaction. At the very bottom of the desktop was one final video file. It was dated just 2 weeks before Jack passed. My hands trembled as I clicked play. There he was, Jack, his face thinner, his body frilier, but his eyes were bright and steady. Debbie, he said softly, if you're seeing this, then you know everything. I'm sorry I left you with this burden, but I also know you're stronger than they ever believed. Stronger than even you realize. He paused for a moment like he was collecting himself. I spent my last months making sure you'd be protected. I should have spent that time with you instead, and that's my only regret. But I couldn't leave without knowing you'd be safe. His gaze sharpened. They underestimated you, Deb. They always have. Now, it's your turn. Show them who you really are. The video ended, but I stayed frozen, the laptop's glow casting shadows over all the careful files Jack had left behind. His final act of love, not with flowers or jewelry but with truth and protection. I won't let you down, I whispered to the empty unit. It was a promise, to him and to myself. The official reading of Jack's will was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. I arrived at Walter's office early, wearing the blue suit Jack always said brought out my eyes. My hair was brushed and pinned, my spine straight. No more slippers. No more shuffling around like the dazed old widow Emily believed I was. You look formidable, Walter said as I took my seat in the conference room. I feel formidable, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. Robert arrived next. He gave my shoulder a warm, steady squeeze before settling into the chair beside me. Then came Brian, the financial advisor, who looked distinctly uneasy. Right on cue at exactly 9:58, Emily and David swept in. Emily wore tasteful black and a well-practiced look of concern, but her eyes gave her away, sharp and calculating. David offered a stiff nod in my direction, his expression unreadable. Mom, Emily said, her voice coated in honey. You're looking better. I just smiled. A quiet, calm smile. She faltered slightly, unprepared for my silence. David leaned over and whispered something to her. Whatever it was, it made her sit taller and set her jaw. They still thought they had the upper hand. Let them think that. At the stroke of 10, Walter cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. We're gathered for the official reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Jack Harper. He began with the usual formalities, his voice measured, professional. I kept my eyes on Emily and David. They looked tense but sure of themselves, passing glances, communicating silently. They had a plan. That much was clear. Before we moved to the division of assets, Walter said, Mr. Harper included a personal letter to be read aloud at this point. He pulled out a sealed envelope and carefully broke the seal. He was clear that this must be read in full without interruption. Emily shifted in her seat, annoyed. Is that really necessary? We all know what Dad would have said. Walter didn't respond. He simply began reading. To my family, if you're hearing this, I have passed on, but my love and concern remain. Throughout my life, I held honesty, integrity, and loyalty to family as sacred values. These were not just words to me, they were how I tried to live. I saw Emily's posture begin to change. In my final year, I was forced to confront painful truths. I discovered betrayal by people I trusted. Plans made behind closed doors. Deception. And worst of all, efforts to manipulate and isolate my wife after my passing. Emily went pale. David reached under the table and gripped her hand. I have gathered documented evidence, Walter continued reading, including recordings, bank records, and signed affidavits. I know about the forged signatures, the unauthorized loans, the meetings with realtors, the evaluations arranged behind Debbie's back. I know everything. That's ridiculous. Emily shouted, her voice shrill. Dad was confused at the end. He was on medications. Walter didn't flinch. Miss Harper, I am required to read this in its entirety. And so he did. He read every word Jack had written. About the forgeries, the attempts to institutionalize me, the financial exploitation while I was grieving and distracted. Each line chipped away at Emily's carefully built facade. Her confident expression began to crumble. She no longer looked composed, she looked exposed. Therefore, Walter read, reaching the final paragraph of Jack's letter, I've made specific provisions in my will to ensure Debbie is protected from these manipulations. I do this not out of bitterness but out of love, for my wife of 45 years and yes, even for my daughter. I can only hope one day she remembers the values we tried so hard to teach her. Silence settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Emily's hands trembled in her lap. David stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might crack. Walter set the letter aside and picked up the will. Now let's move on to the document itself. I already knew what was in it. I'd seen it with my own eyes. But watching Emily's face as each section was read aloud felt like a quiet kind of justice. The house. The investments. The savings. All of it was left to me and every clause was designed to prevent any legal challenge. Emily was set to receive a modest inheritance, but only after 10 years, and only if she had no legal conflicts with me in that time. This is insane, David suddenly burst out. You can't possibly expect us to just accept this. Walter didn't flinch. It doesn't matter whether you accept it. This is a notarized, legally binding document, created with full medical documentation of Mr. Harper's mental capacity. Emily turned to me, her eyes now full of tears. Mom, you know Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end. We were just trying to help. We only wanted to make sure you'd be okay. It was a convincing performance. A week ago it might have worked. By forging my name on loan documents? I asked calmly. By trying to sell my house while I was still living in it? You don't understand, she pleaded. It was for your own good. You can't take care of all this on your own anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small digital recorder, one of Jack's final gifts to me. I placed it gently on the table. Oh, I think we all understand now. I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room crystal clear. Once Dad's gone, we move fast. Get her to sign over power of attorney while she's still emotional. If she resists, we start tracking every little slip, missed appointments, forgotten names, until we have enough to prove she's not fit. Then David's voice followed. Put the house on the market by summer. We'll use her money to pay off the credit cards and get her into Sunny Pines. Those studio apartments are small, but she won't need much space. I clicked stop. Emily had gone pale as paper. There's more, I said quietly. A lot more. Jack made sure of it. David stood abruptly. You were recording us? That's illegal. Actually, Walter interjected, completely unfazed. Jack hired a licensed private investigator. Everything is documented and admissible in court, should it come to that. Emily shot to her feet, knocking her chair backward. This was an ambush. You planned this, both of you. You poisoned Dad against me. And now you're trying to destroy me. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw my daughter's face beneath all that rage. But I also saw someone I barely recognized anymore. No, Emily, I said, my voice even. You did this to yourself. She grabbed her purse, her eyes still wet. You'll regret this, she snapped. You need us. You'll see. As she stormed toward the exit, David right behind her, I called out, Emily. She paused but didn't turn around. Jack wanted me to tell you something, I said, holding my voice steady. He said, it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Her shoulders tensed, just slightly, and for one split second I thought I saw them tremble. Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her. Brian, the advisor, cleared his throat, clearly rattled. Mrs. Harper, I want you to know I had no idea any of this was happening. They told me you had agreed to give them authority over your estate. I believe you, I said. Though truthfully I wasn't sure I did. As everyone began filing out of the room, Robert stayed behind. You holding up okay? He asked gently. I took a long breath before answering. My husband was gone. My relationship with my only child lay in ruins. The future I'd imagined, family dinners, holidays, Emily supporting me in my later years, that was all gone now. And yet, I felt free. Disposed, yes. But also seen. The truth was out and I wasn't pretending anymore. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. Summer gave way to autumn, then to a quiet, snow-covered winter. Now early spring was just beginning to show itself. In my garden, tiny buds pushed through the earth. I knelt at the edge of the yard, planting tulip bulbs along the border, right where Jack and I had always talked about starting a new flower bed. We just never got around to it. They'll be beautiful come April, a voice called from behind. I looked up to see Robert standing at the garden gate, holding a paper bag from our favorite bakery. Since the will reading, he had become a steady presence in my life. Sunday coffee. Light repairs around the house. Sometimes just sitting in silence, reading. He held up the bag. I thought you might want one of those almond croissants you pretend not to love. I laughed, pulling off my gardening gloves. I never said I didn't love them. I said they were a sometimes treat. Well, he smiled, today feels like a sometimes kind of day. It did. The air was crisp but pleasant. The sun warmed my shoulders as we sat down at the patio table. Over the past few months, I'd made some changes to the house and garden, not to erase Jack, never that, but to reclaim this space for myself. The heavy curtains in the living room were gone, replaced with soft, gauzy ones that let in more light. The old formal dining room was now my art studio, and for the first time in decades, I had picked up a paintbrush. "Have you heard anything?" Robert asked gently as he poured coffee from the thermos he'd brought along. I knew what he meant. "Just a Christmas card," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Very formal. Signed by both of them." He nodded, saying nothing more. He understood how deep the hurt ran, how a mother's love doesn't just vanish even when the pain cuts that deep. After the will reading, Emily and David disappeared from my life. Through mutual friends, I'd heard they moved to Phoenix, where David had taken a job with a new firm. The distance, if I'm honest, felt like a gift. It gave me room to breathe. Time to understand everything that had happened. "I've been thinking," I said, shifting the conversation, "about the trip. Jack and I had always dreamed of seeing Italy together. We planned it for retirement, walking the streets of Rome, drifting through Venice in a gondola, standing before the art we'd only ever seen in books. Cancer stole that dream like it stole so many others. The Amalfi Coast in June," I said quietly. "I've already booked the flights." Robert's face lit up. "Debbie, that's incredible." "I'd like you to come with me," I added quickly, the words tumbling out. "As a friend," I clarified. "I just really value the company. And Jack always said you were the best travel companion he ever had." His expression shifted. Pleasure, hesitation, and something else I couldn't quite name passed through his eyes. "I'd be honored," he said at last. "Truly." We sat in silence, the comfortable kind, watching a pair of cardinals flutter from branch to branch. Since Jack passed, I'd learned grief doesn't follow rules. It doesn't walk a straight path. It ebbs, then hits you like a storm. The sight of his old mug, the scent of his aftershave on a coat I hadn't yet let go of. But I'd learned to live alongside it, to carry the ache and the love at once. Jack would have wanted that. The doorbell rang, breaking my thoughts. "Expecting someone?" Robert asked. I shook my head, rising to answer it. Through the frosted glass, I could just make out a slim young woman shifting from foot to foot. My heart jumped. Emily? But when I opened the door, it wasn't her. The girl was maybe in her early 20s, holding a folder close to her chest. "Mrs. Harper?" she asked. "Yes. My name's Lily. Lily Chun. I'm a student at the community college. I'm in Professor Walker's creative writing class. He said he thought you might be willing to speak with me." I smiled, recognizing the name. Professor Walker was the instructor for the writing class I'd started a few months back, part of the memoir project I'd hesitantly begun. "I'm working on my thesis," Lily went on quickly. "It's focused on personal narratives, specifically stories of resilience in older women. Professor Walker said your story was remarkable." I glanced back at Robert. He gave a small, encouraging nod. "Come in, Lily," I said. "We've got fresh coffee. And croissants." Once we settled into the living room, Lily pulled out her notebook and pen. "Professor Walker gave me the basics," she said. "That you lost your husband and had some challenges with your family. Would you feel comfortable sharing more?" I studied her for a moment. The eagerness in her face, the open, curious way she looked at me. 6 months ago, I would have shut the conversation down, protected the wound. But Jack had taught me one last thing. That truth, no matter how difficult, is always better than silence. "It started with a family meeting," I began. "A meeting I wasn't even allowed to attend." 2 hours later, Lily stood by the front door, her notebook now full. She paused before leaving. "Mrs. Harper, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "After everything you've told me, do you still hope to make peace with your daughter someday?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about the Christmas card, formal, cold, but still sent. About the photograph of Emily that still sat by my bed next to the one of Jack. "I've learned to live with uncertainty," I said after a pause. "I hope, yes. But my life doesn't depend on it anymore." Lily nodded slowly. "My mom and I haven't spoken in 3 years. Sometimes I wonder if too much has happened to ever go back." I reached out and touched her arm gently. "You can keep the door open without letting someone walk all over you. That's what Jack helped me understand." After she left, I returned to the garden. Robert was still there, giving us our space. "You told her everything?" he asked, a bit surprised. Most of it, I replied, lowering myself back to the flower bed. She's writing about resilience. I realized I actually have something to say about that. Robert smiled. Jack would be proud of you. Not just for standing your ground, but for finding your way forward. I pressed another tulip bulb into the soil, patting the earth down gently. I know. That evening after Robert had gone, I sat in Jack's old study, my study now, and opened my laptop. The memoir I'd started in my writing class was finally taking shape. One page at a time. Honest. Messy. I'd titled it The Last Legacy. Not because of what Jack left me in money or property, but because of what he truly gave me. The truth and the freedom to reclaim my own life. As I typed, a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. An email. The sender made my heart skip. The message was short. I've been doing a lot of thinking. David and I are separating. I've started therapy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to call you sometime. If that's okay. I leaned back in my chair, a wave of emotions washing over me. Hope, hesitation, and ache that never really left. Outside, the sky had turned to twilight. The tulip bulbs we'd planted sat tucked in the soil, quiet, waiting for their season. With steady hands I began typing. I would like that very much. Your father always said it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I believe that's true for all of us. I clicked send. Then I returned to my writing. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But for tonight it was enough to know that even in his absence, Jack's light was still guiding us forward. His last, and most precious, legacy.